Hi, my name's Will, and I'm going to show you a couple patterns to play with your left hand at the piano while playing jazz styles. This video is brought to you by Music Over Miles' teaching program. So, it's always more fun to play with a real bass player, there's no question. But there's going to be settings, there's going to be times where you're expected to cover the role of bass as a pianist. It's just the reality of gigs. There's going to be a solo gig where you got to play bass for yourself. There's going to be a duo gig where there's a horn player and you got to play bass and rhythm. So how do you get started with all this jazz bass stuff? That's what I'm here to help you with today. So there are two patterns that cover probably 95% of all jazz, swing jazz music, bass texture. And the first one is called a two-feel, and it sounds like this. So what I'm doing there is boom, ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. Beats 1 and 3 of every measure have the root and the fifth, respectively, of the chord that is assigned to that particular measure of music. So the chord cycle progression that I'm using here is D minor 7, G7, C major 7, A7. That's all I'm doing, just for reference. So for the first chord, D minor 7, the root is D, the fifth is A. So those are the two notes you play. And you put a little swing note between everything. That's it. It's pretty simple. That's how you get a foundational, never gonna sound wrong, it's gonna work. That's how you get a two-feel up and running. Roots and fifths. In the right hand, that's where the fun comes, is like how do you play off that two-feel? There's so many different ways you can play off a two-feel. So it may sound boring on its own, but you keep practicing that two-feel. You'll start to appreciate all the different things you can do with it. The next thing, this is a more advanced technique for sure, but this is pretty much the other half of the equation to playing jazz bass, and that's the four-feel, also called a walking bass line. That sounds like this. The idea. Feels good. It's got this sense of movement. It's always walking. It's always moving. It never has any space. It's kind of just, it's a walking bass line. So there's a lot of notes there. How do you know which ones to play? That's where I'm going to break it down into the absolute most simple possible formula to make a functional, good sounding four-feel bass line. So the trick is, just like the two-feel, you always want to land on a chord tone. Well, the two-feel, I said the first and the fifth. It's a little broader for four-feel. You always want to land on a chord tone on beats 1 and 3. Just like the two-feel, those beats 1 and 3, now you just pick any of the four chord tones of any jazz chord, D minor 7. Those are the chord tones. They're always the first, the third, the fifth, and the seventh, no matter the chord, for G, for C, and for A7. Those are your chord tones. So you want to land on a chord tone on beats 1 and 3 without fail. But then what do you do with the other half? What do you do with the second and fourth beats? That's a little more fluid. You don't have to worry so much about it. But two things that you can do to fill in those gaps right off the bat is, for one, you can just use another chord tone. Just use nothing but chord tones on every beat. That works. It's simple. It's worth practicing. The other thing which makes it's kind of jumpy though. A real walking bass line with a lot of vibe has like a contrast between jumps and steps. So another way to approach it is to just try and work step-wise motion into those beats 1 and 3. 1 and 3, you're going to be on a chord tone. For 2 and 4, try and work in a step to connect the chord tones, like this. That was a jumpy one. Here's a steppy one. So I'm playing notes that are not really in the scale. They're not in the chord. It's okay because they kind of they resolve into those chord tones on the strong beats 1 and 3. That just takes experimentation to figure out what do you like, what sounds good. I mean, some of it's not going to sound good. Well, let's see. Like, I don't know. You're going to have some wrong notes in there. You just kind of have to experiment with it and figure out what you like. As long as you land on the chord tones on 1 and 3, though, it's going to be fine. To end up this discussion, I'd like to say that it's a really good walking bass line is generally improvised, but the first step to being able to improvise a good walking bass line is to work out specific patterns and chunks that you can then connect together. So like, say you start with this. Just do that several times. And now you've got that little shape worked out. So when you get to that, it's okay that it's not improvised. That's how you develop the language and the little sentences and stuff that you can then use in a improvisatory way later. You have to practice something specific before you can improvise. So it's okay to work out bass lines for a while, and then over time you'll find yourself kind of going outside the box a little more. And that's just how it goes. So, okay, in this video you've learned the 2-feel and the walking bass. I hope you found it helpful. It was my pleasure to talk with you today. My name is Will Padgett, and thanks for watching.